He's a musician's musician. He's performed with everyone from Frank Sinatra to Dave Brubeck. We meet jazz sax player Michael Pedicin at his music studio in Linwood, New Jersey, which doubles as his consulting room. He's also a psychologist. We began by asking him about his father and early musical influences.
My early years and my relationship to my father and music are tightly knitted, so to speak. I grew up as a little guy really watching and listening to who my father was and what he did, and loved it at a very early age. And he used to rehearse in our basement in those days when I was in elementary school, and my elementary school was only about a block and a half away from our house. So I would run home on those days and try to have a chance to listen to his band rehearsing. Interesting dynamic relationship with my dad too is that he never taught me the saxophone. He chose not to do that, which I think is something that kept us having a very healthy father-son relationship. The music that my dad played was very different than music that I was interested in playing. And he did have a very successful record in the late 50s, 58 I think. He had a record called Shake a Hand, which was a million-selling single in those days, you know, a little 45 record. Once I heard the John Coltrane and Cannonball Adderley, my life changed. When I was about 17, in college in Center City, Philadelphia, I was able to go to hear John Coltrane play. Yeah, one of the tunes that I heard Coltrane play was a tune called Mr. PC, which is a blues. His spiritual and emotional thing that came out in his playing, the sound that he had, always intrigued me, still does. I mean, it still appeals to me. I mean, I listen to him every day, probably at some point, whether it's in my car or in my home, at my home or in my office or something. I mean, there's a Coltrane something that goes on in my day. There are two things in my life that always interested me from my youth. Music was probably, obviously, at the forefront, but I always had a great interest in medicine. And that followed me through high school and into college, but I was so devoted to music that I continued to pursue my musical life. And then finally, at the age of 28, I decided to go to medical school, and did go to medical school. And it's a long story about all of that, but I went into this medical school 3 different times in my life, and they accepted me back the 3rd time. And I stayed 2 years, which is all the preclinical studies before you actually go to the hospital to do that. And I left because the more that I studied medicine, the less well I played my saxophone. Then as I began to teach music at the college level, I became so interested in what students like I had been were experiencing musically and emotionally that I had a desire to learn more about all of that. So that's why when I went back to pursue a doctorate in psychology, so that I could kind of figure them out, help them in this path as musicians or artists. And I think, honestly, any sincere, honest therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist even, I think there's a piece of us that wants to learn more about ourselves by studying the field. About maybe even the reason for that dream, or what would have provoked some of those. I think there are special issues that creative people deal with in addition to the regular issues that we all deal with. You know, I mean, we all have the same stuff in life. You know, I often say no one gets out of this life or world without a bunch of stuff. But I think, you know, as an artist or someone who is striving to succeed and even survive and thrive in the world of arts in our country, it's difficult. The Brubeck project was a lot of fun for me, and a lot of interesting stuff went on with that.
A few years ago, Pedicin teamed up with two other veterans of Dave Brubeck's band to record and perform the jazz legend's music.
I was Dave Brubeck's saxophone player in the early 80s for only about a year and a half, actually. I stayed with that band. But it was a wonderful time for me. I experienced Dave and his music and all of that great success that he had. We traveled kind of elegantly compared to some of the ways I had traveled before. Went all over the world. So that was a great experience. I kind of lost touch with Dave a little bit over the years, but one of my best friends was Dave Brubeck's drummer when I went with him. Randy Jones, his name is. So when I had this thought, it came as a result of Randy and his bassist, Michael Moore, talking to me about the fact that Dave was finally starting to slow down a little. He was 90 years old. So I called Dave and spoke to him about it, and he was 100% behind it. Yeah, I've taught forever. Started the jazz program at Temple University, and then I took some years off because I was on the road too much. Then I went back to the University of Arts as an adjunct. Then I came to Stockton, which is the Richard Stockton College of New Jersey, as an adjunct. And I was brought in by Lance Olson. And I began as an adjunct, and then Lance started to talk to me about could we form a jazz program here at Stockton? And that's what we're now in the process of doing.
What was it like to play with Dave Brubeck?
Very interesting experience. You heard Dave Brubeck just now in class, and that was not somebody who I spent a whole lot of time listening to. I was listening to John Coltrane and Cannonball Adderley. So he said, we're going to rehearse in 3 weeks. And I said, will you send me some music to look at before the rehearsal? And he said, well, I don't really have parts for the saxophone. He said, but you know all of my music, right? And I said, oh, of course. And that was January 1st, and stores are closed. I mean, this whole thing that jazz musicians do, and maybe musicians and artists in general, I mean, it's always a journey. You know, we're always learning, we're always hoping to play differently, always hoping to play better, which is what jazz is. You know, I never want to play the solo tonight that I had played last night, so I always hope my improvisational ability and level increases and takes us to a new place. At this stage of my life and this age, it's interesting to me because I'm probably at the best place I've ever been. I'm not conflicted anymore about wanting to be a physician and a musician, and that was a deep conflict for me for many, many years. So I'm purely a musician and a psychologist, but I mean, I can purely function as a musician. I feel like I'm probably playing better than I ever have in my life, probably because I'm free of a lot of those other pieces of emotional baggage that may have been there.